Good morning to the panel of examiners of Stellenbosch University of Science and Literature. By way of introduction, my name is Chiowa Orizu Chendo. I consider this a privilege and honor to present before you the PhD Thesis Defense. My PhD was on international business law with emphasis on the law of aerospace. By God's grace, I conducted the research personally. It was an intense work which I undertook for a number of years. I did all the research, I did all the findings, I did all the write up myself. In fact, as a matter of fact, I even did the typing myself because I'm also very skilled in the use of computer, MS Word, and all that. So it's an honor and a privilege. Thank you so very much. The work as presented to the university examination panel is a 7-chapter work. Even though in the course of the conducting the research work, I eventually found myself doing as much as 10 chapters. It was quite involving for me. I have some other part of the work that even has to do with execution of judgment, right of air users, and all that. But basically, to discuss the aspects of the work which has been submitted and approved. The law of aerospace deals with the law that governs aeronautic and astronautic. Aeronautic has to do with aeronautics has to do with the development of flights, development of aircraft, the operations, the licensing of aircraft within 100 kilometers from sea level upwards, from sea level up to 100 kilometers above sea level. And then astronomic has to do with the operation and the development of space machines from 100 kilometers beyond. So, in a nutshell, that is what the work is about. It may be said, maybe interchangeably, the aviation law could be another word, another way of expressing the law of aerospace, but aerospace is broader than that. Aviation is just a branch of aerospace. And so for me, what propelled me was the fact that in the country where I live, I grew up and I practiced law that I have practiced for about 14 and 15 years now, having been called to bar in 2008. There is little literature on the law of aviation. We don't have many cases in courts that have been decided in aviation law. This may be as a result of the fact that the industry is not a free for all. You must be very wealthy to own a carrier, and then even people who have expended so much to set up those carriers may not ordinarily want to belabor themselves so much in courtroom over issues. They may prefer to do negotiations and settlements and get going with their business and keep delivering and keep having their turnovers, And then you find that our court system sometimes can be a bit slow, but then having observed that there are other kinds of cases. Okay, let's make a direct comparison with things that has to do with driving or tenancy or employee relationship. All those other aspects are things that come to the court every now and then. And so when I decided to take up the work, I understood the first challenge. You may not find so many case laws, but incidentally, there is an existing act, which is the Nigerian Civil Aviation or Authority Regulatory Act of 2015. We have the FAN Act. Then we have also the NAMA Act. These acts have been made into law by the National Assembly, and they guide the operation of the aviation industry. Of course, we have the Ministry of Transportation. Some time ago, it looked like it was called the ministry. There was a specific Ministry of Aviation. You see, these are efforts our government have already put in place to ensure that in the aviation industry there is the enforcement of law. But then it wasn't as enormous as other aspects of law, litigation, and books in that regard, writings, no, it wasn't that much. So it was a huge task for me. But the saving grace for me is that aviation ordinarily is intrinsically international in nature. That means that for you to operate an aircraft, even if it is a local flight, you must abide by international best practices. And so there are already a lot of cases in foreign nations, in US, and quite a number of other nations that have gone to court and have been decided on a number of legal principles that has to do with the rights, that has to do with where there is a breakage in flight, that has to do with issues of manufactured products that were defective. Quite a whole lot of cases already exist. And of course, there is an International Civil Aviation Organization Convention of 1947, which was also very handy. So when I brought these materials, foreign materials written by foreign authors, I had to find myself making comparison with what is existing within Nigeria. And of course, with the knowledge of law, having practiced law for quite a number of times, I was able to make out what today, by God's grace, I can say is a veritable guide for anybody who wants to venture into aviation law in Nigeria. Now, the chapter, first of all, before we get to the chapter one, the work has a preface. My thesis has a preface that copiously explained the challenges and what should be expected in the work. And of course, for me also, I found it very necessary. If you want to talk about aviation law, which is a specialty, it will be necessary to start by defining and explaining what law is. Law is a body of principles, guiding laws, rules that certain persons have adopted or made for themselves to be binding on them. And of course, a disobedience of same will attract a sanction. There can also be provisions in the course of defining law. Then you can also find provisions for arbitration. So I had to go into discussing what law is and the sources of law. We have a number of sources of law. We have received English law, we have statutes, we have enactments by National Assembly, we have interpretation of jurists, judges, that's case laws. So these are the ways laws have developed over time. Then we also have customary laws. I found it necessary that these aspects, the definition of law and the sources were discussed in the work. Then I now went further to discuss what is the relationship, in as much as we have local jurisdictions, or let's say jurisdictions. Every state has its jurisdiction. Meanwhile, the word state, it means country in international law. So every state have a jurisdiction which should be protected. A foreigner shouldn't come to tell them how to run their state. But in the midst of jurisdiction, in the midst of laws guiding a particular territory, how do you allow international law, or how do you allow other nations to come into your sphere, your domain, without breaching those laws? So we had to look at the chapter 2 has to do with a comparison of this concept, the concept of jurisdiction, the concept of sovereignty in relation to the international nature of aviation law. And of course, that simply suggests that there is a way a way every nation, every state should make their law such that every flight coming from another state can easily have accommodation, and then it should be according to international best practices, and this is what a CAO convention encourages. Then went further to talk about the concept of international law. Like earlier mentioned, you can't talk about aviation without talking about international law. It's naturally international because conventions are signed and treaties are signed by member states. So when a member state signs a treaty, it's expected for him to find a way to implement it into his country, either by domestication or by some form of enforcement, so that it doesn't look as if he's breaching international standards. And so these were the things that were contained in the chapter 2. And then before I go further, in the course of this work, by God's grace, I was able to propose certain principles, the concept of force, the concept of force, and also other concepts that I had to lend original assertion to. I had to lend original credence to them. I gave the definition for them for the first time. I never saw them anyway. Then, of course, chapter 4 was a very copious work, comparison between the International Civil Aviation Organization Convention of 1947 together with the Nigerian legislation, the Nigerian Constitution, the NCAA Regulatory Act, the FAN, the NEMA. I had to give comparison of these laws. So what I did in that chapter was to get when you look at issues of sovereignty, in what way has Nigeria enforced sovereignty? When you look at issue of territorialism, in what way has Nigerian laws enforced territorialism? When you look at issue of scheduled and unscheduled flight, in what way has the Nigerian civil aviation law made for scheduled and unscheduled flight? When you look at issues of pilotless airplane, when you look at issues of cabotage, when you look at issue of search of airplane, when a whole lot of issues about I think well over 60 of them, I had to make serious comparisons of these issues in the chapter 4 of the work. And you see, the beautiful thing about it is that it tells you to what extent has Nigeria complied with these principles, or with these enactments or convention that ICAO gave forward. To what extent has Nigerian government, and it can be said veritably that Nigerian government has complied to a very large extent. Regulation of air flights, issues of tariff, a whole lot of issues that are contained in the chapter 4. I mean, that one is even the biggest of the issues. And so the comparison was a successful one. It took quite a while, but it was quite a successful one. Then in the chapter 5, I had to talk about space. I found the NASA Act of 2010 very useful and very relevant. Then I had to look at also international conventions that has to do with space. When it comes to space, the truth is that every nation who has been able to take on the space, who has been able to launch any rocket or any machine equipment on the space, has a whole lot to benefit. Economically, they have a whole lot to benefit. In the science world, they have a whole lot to benefit. And so when nations are coming up like this, it's necessary to make legislations to balance out, so that we don't have chaos even in the outer space. And then the chapter 6 has to do with comparison of laws, decided cases. Basically, a number of 3 decided cases. I had to look at the Warsaw Convention. I had to also go into what is the definition of an accident. What's the definition of an aircraft accident? What has our judges said? What has our judges said